So today we're talking to Robert Matiru, Director of Program Division at Unitaid. He's going to talk about how Unitaid has pivoted to play a role in the global response to COVID-19, and also about some of their innovative work in general and specifically in HIV. So Robert, thanks for joining us from Geneva.
Thank you.
And so, I'm wondering if you just want to start out talking about what happened, at the beginning of the pandemic with Unitaid, how you were able to pivot, what you're doing, and also how you're safeguarding your pre-pandemic investments and the work that you have been doing for years.
Great. Thank you for that question. When the pandemic was declared in March, Unitaid felt at the time that we were in a very strong position to be able to respond fast in contributing to the global COVID-19 response. The reason for that being that we have an active investment portfolio of roughly $1 billion spread across 45 different implementers around the world. And these range from product development partners to NGOs to UN agencies and others. And we felt that if we could leverage those investment vehicles to contribute to the response, we could do so pragmatically and speedily. So on the one hand, we were able to commit over $30 million within a matter of weeks in a number of investments. On the one hand, we committed money to support the generation of evidence on repurposing existing medicines potentially for the use of treatment of COVID in resource-limited settings in low and low middle-income countries. We have a number of clinical trials that are underway to assess different treatments and for HIV, antiretrovirals in people living with HIV, people living with HIV and TB. And so we were able to use those clinical trial networks to also look at potential COVID treatments, including in those vulnerable populations. We were able to also leverage our diagnostic projects to position countries, particularly in low middle income countries in Africa, to be positioned to rapidly set up COVID testing using molecular platforms. And as you know, molecular platforms are already used for TB and HIV diagnosis. And we, in collaboration with governments and partners in these countries, invested to help those governments establish SARS-CoV-2 testing programs, and thereby laying a foundation for when additional and larger funds come through, the programs would be able to move very quickly. In addition to that, we have projects that are helping countries with fever management, and an important tool for fever management is being able to provide oxygen and tools to measure oxygen and heart rates. And so we supported programs to provide respiratory support, which is obviously key in the case of COVID. And we also supported programs with health worker and patient protection so that at least our frontline implementers in the field could protect themselves and their partners in this context. And lastly, and it's a collaboration we're also doing with Every Woman, Every Child and MTV Staying Alive Foundation, we have been supporting public health awareness and messaging in Africa about COVID-19, which is really key also in these populations. So in short, by having investment vehicles already in place, supporting HIV, TB, malaria, cervical cancer, and other diseases, we were able to make further investments through these vehicles and make them very quickly in a way that would support the COVID-19 response, but also safeguard the work that's being done for these major diseases already.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, showing how crucial it is to already be there doing the work and also be agile enough to pivot is really great and amazing. Thank you for that. And so, as the International AIDS Society conference, the AIDS 2020 launches this week and has gone virtual. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the current work that you're doing that ties into HIV diagnostics and what Unitaid is focusing on for AIDS 2020, and what role you're playing in the conference this week.
Great. Thanks for that question. I mean, of our investment portfolio of roughly $1 billion, half of that is in HIV and co-infections. And of that, over half is in diagnostics. our diagnostics investments are wide-ranging. On the one hand, we invest heavily in screening and testing. As you know, there's still a very large gap of people who do not know their HIV status, particularly among young men and adolescents. And so we have invested over the last 5 years more than $100 million in HIV self-testing. On the supply side, in generating a market for these tests, and on the demand side, generating the evidence that these tests are effective, feasible, acceptable, and can be deployed in different ways in resource-limited settings. So one big area of investment remains HIV self-testing and driving this in collaboration with many other partners such as PEPFAR and the Elton John AIDS Foundation and PSI to really continue the momentum of positioning HIV self-testing for scale. Incidentally, the COVID-19 pandemic has made it all the more important to provide self-care in this context when people can't go to public health hospitals because of lockdown and other restrictions. So having the opportunity to self-screen for HIV with a self-test is all the more important even under these circumstances. So that will be another thematic that is profiled at the IAS 2020 conference, and that's very important. Beyond self-testing, we are also large supporters of point-of-care testing for early infant diagnosis. So testing HIV in young infants and children. We have invested heavily in positioning point-of-care testing widely in resource-limited settings, where it's difficult to get same-day test results at large labs based in large urban centers as opposed to decentralized health settings. And this is another area that remains very important for us. And we're very happy that in the last 2 consecutive years, there has been acceptance of the cost effectiveness and impact of point-of-care testing, and we hope to see more rollout of such tests. And beyond that, we're also working on testing for co-infections. So we have a lot of investments in supporting the management of advanced HIV disease, people presenting very late with advanced forms of HIV caused by co-infections. And so we're pushing for tests to help detect cryptococcal meningitis, for tests that can help test for TB in people with very low CD4 cell counts because they have HIV, and you can use a urine test in this particular instance. So we're trying to push for those types of tests. And recently we launched, together with Omega Diagnostics, a point-of-care rapid test for CD4 cell count testing, which is really key, again, for managing advanced disease because it helps you determine the cell count of patients using a very small lateral flow test as opposed to a larger test platform. So a lot of interest and investment in the testing space for Unitaid, and we will be profiling these innovations and these investments at IAS this year.
Great. Is there any other innovation that you have in the pipeline that's really promising that you want to talk about? Anything interesting that might be coming through soon?
What we are really excited about is important developments in the treatment space. So you may have seen the news that ViiV recently had an approval from the US FDA for its pediatric version of dolutegravir, which is a first-line integrase inhibitor, and it's really important that treatment is available for children. Through work that Unitaid is doing with other partners and generic companies, 2 generic companies have filed their generic versions of the same product with the FDA, and we hope in the coming months, if not by the end of the year, those will also be approved, making much cheaper generic versions of that very effective first-line treatment available for children. So that is something that's in the pipeline, as it were, insofar as it still needs approval by the FDA, but all going well. With that approval, it's something that could start to be rolled out next year and make a world of difference for children with HIV. So that's an important development we're expecting. Another would be an important drug for the second-line treatment of HIV. It's called darunavir ritonavir, and this is an important drug combination that we hope to provide incentives for the supply of not this year, but hopefully all going well starting next year. So that's another pipeline product for treatment that is available. In terms of diagnostics, I mean, I mentioned earlier that we hope to see the rollout and release of what we call a TB LAM test. It's a test for TB, but it's critical because of TB HIV co-infection. And this test, if priced appropriately, is really practical to use, and if it has the right sensitivity and specificity, could really transform the detection of TB in HIV, people living with HIV with very low CD4 cell counts, meaning they're really, really sick. And that's something that's in the pipeline that we're working on, hopefully driving out of the pipeline and into the market at some point next year.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us and explaining some of that. And it's highly technical in some ways, so we'll want to link to some resources whenever we send out this video. But it's great to hear that these other diseases and issues aren't being forgotten. Still a lot of innovation and pushing forward and getting out there. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Natalie.